Got a question asking if a lease says that the rent is due on the first, but you have until the fourth before you're assessed. Penalties from this questionnaire, I'm assuming that they mean late fees. Can a landlord or property manager um, basically issue a 3 day notice to pay rent or quit on the third or the fourth? What would be the proper date? Hi, my name is Rob Wells. I'm the Landlord Boy on TikTok and YouTube. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to our videos. Now, I run into a lot of landlords that might be, confusing what their late fee provisions provide for in the lease, and whether or not if the late fee provision is basically a grace period or not to pay the rent. Okay, so let me break it down like this. Okay, a landlord could hypothetically have a provision that requires a tenant to pay late fees after so many days out of the month pass, or a number of days pass after the rent due date has passed, and if the rent hasn't been received, the tenant is obligated to pay a late fee. Okay, that's very common. That provision doesn't necessarily create a grace period for the tenant to actually pay rent. Instead, some leases will write out that it's specifically not a grace period for purposes of delinquent rent. It's just an additional charge will be added to the tenant's ledger that the tenant is obligated to pay. So depends on really what the lease, how the lease is written and how it's framed, because if it is framed as a grace period, the tenant has, the rent's due on the first, but then there's a 3 day grace period where the rent is not considered delinquent, the tenant could pay within that 3 day period basically, then the rent's not delinquent and you can't issue a notice for non-payment of rent. Okay, and I'm assuming from this, I don't know what this person means by like harassment, that type of stuff, but for our purposes here, if this landlord was to give the tenant a 3 day notice to pay rent, it's really going to depend on the lease term. Okay, whether or not there is a grace period or not. Just because you have a late fee provision, again, it doesn't mean that that's a grace period. And the good leases will actually state that it is not a grace period. So if I see a lot of landlords will issue a 3 day notice for rent if several months of rent are delinquent, and then it's like the fourth of the month, the rent's due on the first, there is no grace period, it becomes delinquent the next day, for example. Then I could see that landlord issuing a 3 day notice for 4 months worth of rent, the current rent plus the 3 months prior. So again, landlords, this could get very tricky here, because if you issue your 3 day notice prematurely where it has rent that hasn't become past due, your rent notice or your 3 day notice for rent could be defective. So you got to be very careful about when you issue that notice, and make certain that the rent is actually delinquent. And usually the lease term is going to govern that basically, and will spell that out. And if it's silent basically on any grace period and whatnot, it's generally presumed that, hey, once the first comes, the rent's due the next day. Okay. But things can get tricky though, such as, if the parties have treated rent as not delinquent, that could be raised in a defense too. So what I'm going to say is this, your mileage is going to vary. You probably need to talk with landlord's counsel just to make sure, you're issuing the notice at the right time and know what the lease terms say before you issue that notice. Because once you issue a 3 day notice for rent, the only way to fix it is to serve another one. Okay, because if it was served prematurely, that's going to be a problem potentially in your case here. So best to talk with counsel and find out what how you have to issue the notice pursuant to your actual lease terms. Okay, landlords, if you're facing a problem where your tenant's not paying rent on time, or there's a question about if the rent's late or not, and if you're in the Northern California area, feel free to reach out. We might be able to help out. You can hit our profile down below to book a free case review session. A couple of questions will be asked just to see if we'll be a good fit or not. Put your comments, questions down below, and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. Until next time, folks, I'll talk to you then. Thanks.